All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Good crack of noon to our friends on the East Coast. I'm Todd Obert, CEO of Productive Corporation. Alongside me here virtually is Seth Geftic, Director of Product Marketing for Sophos. He is the guy with the time today. I'm apparently 2 to 3 minutes slow on my computer. So, but I guarantee you from now, we are going to be very on time. If you've been with us in the past, you know how we do it. We're going to meet productive in 1 minute. Then I'm going to hand it over to Seth, who is going to talk about the latest trends and engagements in XDR, MTR, EDR, all this stuff, different terms out there that you want to hear about. You want to hear about how this space is evolving. Very cool stuff. So I'm glad that you're here today. As always, if you have a question, utilize the chat feature. We'll get that question answered. Now, let's meet Productive. Well, who is Productive Corporation? Well, I'm so glad that you asked me that silently. Productive Corporation provides security solutions for mid-sized companies. We have specialized expertise for technical and licensing questions. We also implement, test, and optimize all the things that we sell. We can do security assessments. We can do Active Directory services. We can help configure that firewall or UTM that you are getting installed. We also produce a lot of third-party content. You can find that at productive.com/solving security. The bottom line is we're here to help you. We have a bunch of resources and love to do that for our customers, whether that's implementation, assessment, licensing, services, all of it. You can reach us at help@productivecorp.com. If you still have a rotary phone, call us at 612-375-0204 and we will answer. So there you go. That's who Productive is. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, Seth Geftic is here with us from Sophos. He runs the team that is all endpoint, right, including what's happening with MTR and EDR and XDR. Fantastic stuff. I think you're really going to appreciate what he has to say. So let's give it up. Let's have a warm virtual round of applause for Mr. Seth Geftic. Seth.
Thank you very much. Hope everyone is doing well today. So I'm excited to share with you some of the latest trends that we've been seeing. So the idea today is to talk about what people are seeing in the threat detection and response world. So at Sophos, we have a team of incident responders, and we also have a team of threat hunters that monitor customer environments. We have thousands of customers that use our managed services. And most, as you might guess, most of what they deal with today is ransomware. So before I jump into what they're seeing, I'll bury the lead and say they're seeing a lot of ransomware and pre-ransomware behavior. And to put that into context, I wanted to share with you all a brand new survey that we just released literally a week ago on ransomware, to put these ideas in some perspective, to put these trends in perspectives. So you might be thinking, oh my gosh, another ransomware webcast over and over again. The reason we keep having these is because ransomware has not gone away, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Every year I think I'm done with ransomware, and every year it's the number one thing we talk about. So we just did a survey of globally of 5,000 organizations around the world, IT and security professionals, and more than 1 in 3 were hit by ransomware in the past year, which is a shocking number, and even more shocking when you realize that's actually low compared to the previous years. Of those that were hit by ransomware, more than half of them said that the cyber criminals succeeded in encrypting their data, meaning it was at least a somewhat successful attack on those defenses. So even though we have solutions out there that we know are proven to be very, very effective against ransomware, there's still organizations that don't deploy them, that deploy them incorrectly, or got hit by some other avenue of an attack that they just weren't protected with. And these are costly. The average ransom that was paid, and a majority of people actually paid the ransom, was $170,000. But that doesn't even really capture the full cost of the attack. And part of the reason the attack cost so much money is because even when people paid the ransom, only about 2/3 of the data was restored after that ransom was paid. So sometimes people got none, some people got some. Very rarely did people get all of their data back when they paid the ransom. And that's why it costs almost $2 million was the average recovery bill for an attack. Again, this isn't us coming up with numbers, this is survey respondents. So this is what IT and security professionals estimate ransomware attacks cost them in the past year. I mentioned that the number of attacks, the percent of organizations actually went down. So 37% is a shockingly large number of organizations that got hit by ransomware attack. In the past 2 surveys that we did, it was about half the people that we surveyed said they were hit by a ransomware attack. And it spans all types of sectors and all types of industries. So here we broke it down. It's still pretty statistically significant with hundreds of different respondents in each of these categories. It's not a massive range of, hey, this one area is safer than others. Some of this might be coincidental. It could be due to the systems that they run, right? Some might just be more likely to be hit by ransomware than others. It's not surprising things like education have an above average amount, retail, given the number of endpoints they usually have an above average amount of ransomware attacks hit them. Healthcare surprisingly was below average. We hear about healthcare in the news quite a bit, mostly because of the impact on healthcare environments as opposed to the fact that they're hit by any more frequency than anybody else. So I mentioned before that more than half the time when people hit by ransomware, the attackers actually are able to encrypt the data, which is of course bad. The flip side of that is almost 40% of the time people were able to stop the attack before that data was encrypted. And that's great news. We want that to be in the 90s, right? That's the goal of our software. That's the goal of our managed services. And I assume that's the goal of everyone on this phone who are defenders at their organization. The third number is actually more concerning here, is a bit concerning here. So 7% of data not encrypted, but victims still held ransom. And that's actually gone up quite a bit, more than doubled from the past year. If you're saying, wait, what? How does a ransomware attack work if how you held ransom if they haven't encrypted your data? There's a few reasons for that. Sometimes people still get held up for ransom and threatened, even though they actually haven't lost any of their data. But the reason you're seeing the spike there is from sometimes called leakware or extortion attacks, where even if the data wasn't encrypted, the attacker still had access to it and threatened to release that data publicly, which is a common new trick ransomware attackers are using, where they not only encrypt your data, but then they will threaten to leak it out to the public domain bit by bit until you go ahead and pay the ransom, sort of upping the ante in a 10 plague style attack. So you pay the ransom, everything's good. Unfortunately, no. You could see 29% of the time, the organizations that paid the ransom got less than half of their data back, and only 8% of the time did they get all of their data back. So sometimes that's because the attackers just didn't give it to them. Often that's IT reasons, right? It's just the process of decrypting all of your data is actually quite painful and can take a while. And sometimes organizations have already wiped stuff clean before they had the opportunity to go restore it. And again, that's partly why the attacks are costing so much money. So when you think of the impact of ransomware, it's not the ransomware note and the cost of the ransom that's driving up the price. It's everything else: downtime, people time, device costs, network costs, opportunity costs, all combined together makes it quite a difficult bill to pay in the end. So that's ransomware in general. But what about the feet on the street, the incident responders themselves? So I mentioned that at Sophos, we have managed services, one that monitors customer environments 24/7, hunts for threats and responds to any potential attacks. And then we also have an emergency incident response service. So we were able to mine all the data from those services, and particularly the ones of emergency incident response. So this is someone who's not necessarily even a Sophos customer, but they were under attack, they call us, and then our team of experts jump in and help try and save the day. And what we saw was some pretty interesting findings from those engagements. So on average, based on all the evidence we had, attackers were in the environment for 11 days. That means that we think of things like ransomware attacks as so immediate, right? They're very self-identifying. Attack happens, you get an alert, right? And at that point, you're in trouble. But attackers just don't, come in, knock on the door, and then launch their attack, minutes later. Usually they've been in an environment, laying all their traps, scoping it out, figuring out the best way to cause the most damage and panic as possible, usually waiting till off hours. Ransomware attacks love Friday night attacks. Call it Friday night lights sometimes around here. And it also shows the sophistication of the attackers, gives the ability really to do whatever they want in the environment. So even if you've gone and paid the ransom, they've left traps so that they can come back and probably exploit you again if they wanted to. As I mentioned before, most of the incident response engagements involved ransomware. I would say of the other 19%, a good chunk of those involve what we'd call pre-ransomware activity as well, where we're seeing nefarious activity by the attacker. We just don't necessarily know that their end goal is ransomware, but statistically, we have a good feel that that's probably what they're doing. These are also a little bit self-selecting, because you imagine that when someone has been owned for months and an attacker is stealing information or exfiltrating data out, the victim may not even know that ever happens. And if they don't know they've ever been under attack, then they're never going to call us to respond to that incident. Whereas ransomware is, of course, self-identifying. But still, not surprising that we're seeing an overwhelming majority of incidents involve ransomware. We're also seeing them use remote desktop protocol, RDP, for lateral movement. And this is something that we see over and over and over again as organizations have RDP exposed, sometimes because they did that on purpose and forgot about it, and often they don't even realize that they had it. And attackers love open RDP and give the ability to not only get in the environment, then move laterally once they're in there as well. So one of the things, yep.
During incident response, can you guys determine how much data was exfilled, or just that data is being exfilled?
It depends on the attack and what happened. So if an attacker is truly exfiltrating data, let's say through like a server at that point, we would see the volume of data that would go through there. It depends on what we had installed in the environment before the attack, or whether we're coming in with a clean state after. Yeah. Exactly what was stolen. If they're a Sophos customer, like an Sophos EDR customer, we have logs of everything that happens. We would have seen exactly what happened. If they're not a Sophos customer, then we're starting on day zero at that point, and we're just dependent on the data that the customer happened to have. But we can tell what the attacker did, and often they're using RDP. So whether you're using an EDR/XDR tool or some other tool, make sure that you have the ability to scan your environment and determine if you're exposed to those type of attacks. We also see, if you're like, well, should Sophos ever really have a customer and they get hit by an attack and needs to call us? Well, yeah, that does happen. And most of the time, majority of the time, whether it's a Sophos customer or not, someone thinks that they're protected from an attack, and it turns out that the attacker found a hole that was unprotected. So classic example is, yes, I know my servers are important, but I'm protecting all my endpoints with Sophos or another endpoint protection product, but I'll get to my servers next year, right? I'll get to my servers later. Well, attackers can get to your servers right away. They do that all the time. Classic example we see on the incident response engagements is unprotected systems being a way in. Often that's not necessarily a conscious choice. Maybe you said, we're going to protect everything, but you've only rolled out to 95%, or there was a small part of your environment that you never got to for whatever reason. Attackers find it and they realize, oh, we found some unprotected system. We can get into the environment, and then we can use RDP to move laterally, escalate privileges, and then lay our attack. So even if you're 99% coverage, means you're 1% exposed. About a little more than a quarter of the attacks we saw involved data stealing or data exfiltration. So in addition to attacks where they encrypt the data as part of a ransomware attacks, these are attacks where they're also then taking the data and exfiltrating it, again, potentially to as part of leakware or an extortion related to that ransomware attack, or it could be completely unrelated. Before ransomware was a thing, which it seems like forever ago, but was only really probably 4 or 5 years ago before ransomware became the attack we talk about, data exfiltration was really the number one worry, right? Whether that be someone stealing company secrets for business reasons, right? For spying, essentially, whether it be for extortion, whether it be stealing personally identifiable information of employees. If you remember the big attack on the GAO in the United States, the government employees' data was all stolen. So there's a lot of reasons someone could steal and exfiltrate data, and we still see it happen quite a bit. And then, again, I mentioned that sometimes that's used for extortion, and we do, in fact, say in 17% of the incidents that we responded to, the attacker was attempting to publicly leak that data, right? Which is making a really bad day twice as bad by not only hitting you with a ransomware attack, but then threatening to have that data be leaked, which could lead to fines as well as embarrassment, of course. So what are the common gaps that we see when we come in for incidents with our threat detection response teams? Well, again, I mentioned asset coverage is one of the biggest problems, is organizations think they're covered, but have not actually protected all of their devices in their organization, whether that be endpoints and servers or just a % of those endpoints and servers. So make sure you not only spend the time investing in good security, but you actually deploy that everywhere that an attacker might take advantage of it. Even having it deployed doesn't mean it's configured properly. So we see this often where someone turned off an important protection feature for whatever reason, maybe a mistake, maybe they thought it was noisy. They turned it off, and there's a reason that prevention layer was there in the first place. So things like don't turn off tamper protection in a product is a good example. So that means that the attacker can't turn off your antivirus or your endpoint protection service. So make sure that is enabled. Another one is delayed investigation and response to critical alerts. And this is the biggest difference we see between threat detection and response teams at most organizations we work with and our own threat detection and response team is they could be getting the exact same set of alerts. So the customer could have invested in EDR or XDR. They're using that product to do threat detection and response. They're getting alerts, they're investigating. But just because someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you should go look at this, doesn't mean that the analyst, whether that be an IT or security analyst, is going to have time to get to that. And what we see over and over again is the investigation into the critical alert was delayed, the response was delayed, and therefore the attack got missed. And when it comes to these types of attacks, seconds matter. Every second matters because that can make the difference between you stopping the attack and you letting it in. A great example of that outside of Sophos world was the RSA hack. It's now been 10 years since that attack by the suspected to be the Chinese government into RSA, who stole all the seed records to RSA tokens. Wired magazine just did a great article now that the 10 years are up and the NDAs have all been lifted. One of the responders at RSA talks about how they could see the attacker and they were one step behind them every step of the way, and they were literally only seconds away from stopping them at one point, but they were just too late. So when we say every second matters in an attack, it's not just hyperbole, it really does. So being able to see those alerts and respond to them critically is really important. Again, another thing we see is exfiltration, and in particular exfiltration via public cloud containers without detection. So often organizations have those public cloud containers, but with no real monitoring or insight into what's going on there. That's a gap we see. And then lack of experience, and this is kind of related to the delayed investigation response to alerts, is even a really good organization, I'm hoping none of you are really actually that experienced at incident response. Not because I don't think you're good at your jobs, but hopefully you haven't had to go through that many of them in your career because they're terrible, right? Sure, you've seen incidents, you've seen attacks, you've probably stopped a good chunk of those. But when you have one that is more sophisticated, multi-layered, something we would call an enterprise level attack, like enterprise ransomware, where they are in your environment for a week plus, laying traps before they do a ransomware attack. It takes experience to really spot those identifiers and really know what to do to thwart them without tipping the attacker off, without leaving you exposed, right? You might start responding to the attack at that point. They'll realize you're responding, and instead of them waiting 3 more days, they just go ahead and launch the attack. So it's sort of like triggering an alarm a bit as well. So, and even beyond expertise, really lack of coverage is probably a better way to put it. So you might have 3 of the best incident responders, money can buy at your company or threat detection and response team, but if they don't work 24/7, 365, with that whole team, which of course they don't, you're going to have gaps in that coverage. And of course, it always happens at the worst possible time. So jumping into a little more detail, these are the attack tactics seen by our managed threat response team. Again, our 24/7 team of threat hunters and incident responders that monitor customer environment. And what this escalated cases, meaning they got an alert, they looked into it, and then they said, okay, this is significant. We need to essentially respond to this type of attack, this type of threat. I wouldn't necessarily call it an attack at this point, as opposed to all the alerts that they might get, a bunch of which may just turn out to be, yep, we blocked this thing, don't worry about it. So you can see each step of the attack chain here. What you see is the majority of the work that our threat detection and response team actually does is at the beginning stages of attack, where someone's trying to gain that initial access, where they're trying to execute their first executable, and trying to lay tools to become persistent on those devices and in the environment. But 2/3 of the attacks, we actually work there. What I like about this is when you see the exfiltration and impact, it's only 2% of the cases that the threat detection response team actually has to deal with that level. And if you're asking yourself, well, is that good or that's bad? Well, it's kind of both. You never want to get to that point, but sometimes it happens. But what the real skill here is, when you have a really mature threat detection and response team, is not waiting to impact and then figuring out how to respond to it, because it's usually too late. It's discovering all the attacks along the attack chain that are what the attackers need to do, the steps they need to take to be successful, and stopping them as early in that attack chain as possible. So before they get credential access, before they move laterally, right?
Yeah. So Seth, what do you have a rough time? I mean, as you look at all these cases, how much do the attackers get in? What is that first phase? That 64%? Is that 2 to 4 days, 2 to 4 weeks? What's the?
It's for our customers, it's more like minutes and hours, right?
Okay.
Because we're detecting it pretty quickly.
So they get through these phases pretty quickly.
They can get through these phases pretty quickly. Now, that's because we're catching so many of them up front.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, in an average organization that doesn't have a security operations team watching out, they're going to spend a long time. They're going to go low and slow here. So things like lateral movement, discovery, collection, all of this might take days, which is why on the incident response, when we came in after the fact, when someone called us that we weren't monitoring the environment, on average, we saw those attackers in the environment for 11 days before they realized what was going on. Mm-hmm. And if you read things like the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, which is a great cross-industry breach report, really for big enterprises, they talk about months in terms of dwell time for attackers, which is pretty concerning. Obviously, the more sophisticated the attacker, the more sophisticated the attack, the longer they're going to be in there. Some are just opportunistic, that'll be a little quicker.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what's happening in the landscape. The next question is what to do about it. And what to do is build out threat detection and response program in your organization. So what exactly does that mean? That means that we know that we're going to block as much bad stuff and let in as much good stuff as possible, right? As Sophos, as an endpoint protection company, we do a lot of things, but endpoint protection in this case, we block as much bad stuff as we can. And of course, you are going to do that. We're going to do that. Every vendor is going to do that. But what about all the stuff that we're missing? Either stuff that we weren't sure about, stuff that legitimately just got missed because we didn't have protection for it up front. What can we do about those things? Those are the attacks that get through the front door, right? Most of what we can block, even if it is still a lot of noise that we're blocking there. 90+% of what we block on a day-to-day basis is we would consider just to be noise. Like, we should of course be able to block that. It's more, it's that top 1% of attacks that you really need to worry about, which seems like a small amount, but given the volume of attacks on a daily basis, it's not. So that's what threat detection response is built for, is figuring out what to do when you don't automatically block something. Can you still detect the attacker and stop them before they do damage? And this is a huge area across the industry. So ESG Research, one of the big research firms here in the States, they just put out a survey that said of the IT teams that they interviewed, that they surveyed, 83% were planning to increase threat detection response spending in the next year to year and a half. So we know this is a big area of concern across the entire industry. So one of the ways that Sophos could help is with our own detection response tools. So we have both EDR and XDR. XDR is kind of the main offering here, which is extended detection and response. So that means that we can see everything that's happening on endpoints, servers, firewall, and other data sources like Sophos Mail as well. Right? It gives us the ability to see into the environment, not just block all the bad stuff, but see all the activity happening there. And once we have that visibility, we then have the ability to add additional context to it, say, okay, we saw this happening, what does this mean? And then the analyst can ask whatever question they want of their environment to really investigate, say, okay, we got this alert, it looks suspicious. What do I want to ask to find out, yes, I know this is good, this is bad, I need to do more investigation, and then ultimately, what do I need to do to respond to this attack, right? And if you think about some of those things that we saw our MTR team, our threat response team sees on a day-to-day basis, like RDP being used for lateral movement, that's exactly the type of visibility you want as a threat detection response team to figure out, okay, I'm seeing lateral movement using RDP, I want to look into that and see if this is malicious or not. And if it is, that might be an indicator that attackers are in my environment attempting to do something. And all of that means that you're not going to miss things, right? So automatic protection is amazing, right? We have the best endpoint protection available, but nothing is 100%. There is no silver bullet to security. Those are the two cliches that I've probably said a million times in my career, and there's a reason for that. It's because they're true. So you don't want to miss anything that happens beyond automated protection. So in order to do that, you need the data to have that visibility. Our product has both 30 days of data in a cloud-hosted offline retention, meaning even if the machine is down, we can look back and go back 30 days of history. But we also have 90 days of incredibly rich on-device retention as well. So we have two really key data sources that when put together means we have a complete picture of what's happening in the environment. So even if the attack happened 11 days ago, we're still going to be able to determine that root cause, go back in time, kind of replay the tape, so to speak, and figure out what's going on. And the great thing about this is it's an ecosystem. So the more Sophos products you have, the more data you have fed into that detection response tool, which means you can get clearer answers about what's happening. So I mentioned endpoint and server is really what we consider to be EDR, endpoint detection response. XDR just continues to add more and more offerings. And XDR is really where the industry is headed. So not just looking at endpoint only data, but looking at your entire environment. So we have network information in there. If you have XG Firewall, Sophos email as well. And then next quarter, we should add mobile data as well as our Cloud Optics cloud data. So a lot of data in the tool. The more data you have, the more context you have, the better chance you have of catching an attack. I mentioned the different types of data. To go into that a little bit more detail, we have both the 30 days of data in a data lake. So again, that gives us the ability to correlate information across all of our data sources, endpoint, servers, firewalls, email, and the other ones that I mentioned. And even if those devices are offline, let's say you shut the network down because you're under attack, the data is still there and still available to the analyst. They still have that 30 days worth of history to figure out what's going on. But if you want a real-time view of what's happening right at this moment, we still have 90 days of the richest endpoint device you can find, data that you can find out there. So that not just gives you the historical view, but also the real-time perspective of what's going on with a ton of granularity, which really lets you ask those really detailed questions. And the nice thing about that is you then have the ability to respond with precision. So there's several different response actions, but you could also live terminal into a device, let's say reboot it, install a program, kill a process, remove a file, whatever you can do via live terminal, the analysts with privileges can go in and respond to the incident remotely right away when they see something suspicious. So if you're listening to me and you're like, this sounds awesome, but there's just no way we're going to pull it off in our organization, you are not alone. You can join one of the thousands of Sophos MTR customers, managed threat response. So whereas EDR and XDR is something you would do on your own, managed threat response is essentially outsourcing a team of 24/7 threat hunting and incident response experts. So they've seen it all, they've stopped it all. They don't sleep, they don't take vacation. There's someone every day of the year, every hour of the day, monitoring your environment to see if any suspicious activity is occurring. If so, investigating it. And if so, if having to escalate that, responding and shutting down the attack. And that's what I showed you on that attack chain before. So that is a service that we, again, have thousands of customers globally looking at today.
Yeah.
And I know it's really that productive.
Yeah, if you don't have an InfoSec team, MTR is something to really look at. If you guys want to talk about what your InfoSec capabilities are, we're happy to talk to you about XDR and how it could fit. But MTR is what we see a lot of people going to just because they don't have the capacity on their staffs.
Mm-hmm. And even organizations that do have some really good people on staff, again, you don't have 24/7 coverage and they don't have that expertise. So often what those organizations might do is outsource a lot of their day-to-day security operations to Sophos and then work on really the specialized cases where you know your environment better than anyone and you could focus on those really key cases and still have a lot of the day-to-day work sent to Sophos MTR team. And then hopefully none of you ever need this other service, rapid response, but just in case, we'll talk about it. This is for someone who doesn't have MTR. If you are, whether you're a Sophos customer today or not, if you get hit by an attack and you need outside help, you can give us a call any day of the week, any time of day. A real human being will answer the phone. If you go to sophos.com/rapid response, you'll see the phone numbers there, or give Productive a call. They can reach out on your behalf. And what that is an immediate emergency incident response service where we'll come in remotely, neutralize the threat, stop the threat, and then monitor your environment for the rest of your 45-day engagement, which is a fixed cost price. So we tell you exactly what it's going to be up front. And for 45 days, you're covered. Whether the attacker comes back, another attacker comes, or nothing happens, we'll still be there to make sure you're in the clear. Yeah. Again, I hope no one needs this one, but unfortunately,
if you can't get management to buy MTR, you may be coming to us for rapid response. I can tell you buying MTR up front is going to be more cost effective, and it's going to be over 3 years you'll get the deal. Rapid response they do a great job, and we've had customers that have had to utilize it. But it's de facto. Something has happened in their environment. So
yeah, the majority of the people who end up doing a rapid response engagement eventually end up just signing up for the full service because they realize they should have done that in the first place.
Yeah.
So to sum up those offerings, if you want to do threat detection response on your own, Sophos EDR, XDR are really your best options. If you want to outsource that, the Sophos MTR team will do it for you. You still get the tools, so you can still do your own in-house IT and security operations work using the tools, but the day-to-day work will be done by the MTR team. And if you have an emergency incident response, a rapid response is the right one. So I know I'm a little bit over, but I'm happy to take questions, Todd, if that works for you. I left some resources up here on the screen. A lot of those ransomware stats came from the new State of Ransomware 2020 report. We have really good handouts for guides on how to do incident response, and then some tips from incident response experts that I would check out as well. And if you're interested in the MTR service or the XDR product, we have those acronym quick URLs on the bottom.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. If there's a last minute question, let me know. I've been kind of answering them or asking them, and you've been answering them along the way. So that's been fantastic. Yeah, this is great stuff, Seth. I think you did a great job of talking about what is really happening out there, right? And keep in mind that that's from what end users are saying, not from what just the industry is saying. Sometimes that's different because the industry has an agenda. This is what real end users are saying. And when you take a look at these offerings on a continuum, it's pretty robust. So really appreciate that. Yeah, it looks like we're going to wrap it up here.